Yeah, I heard Nancy tell you guys, what's more important, me or your grandchildren? I guess you're still debating on that one, huh? See, for those of you who are new with us, they're moving to Seattle to be with their grandchildren. And I guess their children, too. It's a package deal, right? All righty. Well, been going through a series called Words in Red for over a year now, and we finally made it into the Gospel of John a couple weeks ago, and I'm going to take you to Jerusalem this morning. So I'm in John chapter 5. Let us take a look. There is in Jerusalem a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed, and they waited for the moving of the waters. From time to time, an angel of the Lord would come down and stir up the waters. The first one into the pool, after each such disturbance, would be cured of whatever disease he had. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in that condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." And at once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and he walked. So later, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you're doing well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you." So much going on here. First of all, I want to talk about Bethesda. You hear this kind of story over and over again. The Bible mentions a miracle at Bethesda. The scholars, the historians, the archaeologists say, that's a myth. We've been all over Jerusalem. There is no place called Bethesda. It makes me want to wring their necks. To say that place doesn't exist would be similar for you telling me that a small village in China doesn't exist, though you've never been to China and don't know anything about China. Okay, you visited once and you toured the Great Wall in Hong Kong. Now you're going to tell me this little village off in the mountains doesn't exist. You know, of all the archaeological data that there is to know, what a fraction of a percent they acknowledge knowing. And if you acknowledge knowing only 1%, which is generous, how can you say something doesn't exist? Oh, but they'll go to school with you over it and tell you, "Oh, you naive Christian people, you'll just believe anything in that book, won't you?" So for years, the skeptics said this story was a myth. There was no place called Bethesda in Jerusalem in the first century. So I'm reading to you from according to a book, an article digging for evidence. Peter S. Williams quotes Peter Walker, professor of biblical studies at Trinity School for Ministry in Pennsylvania. Here's the quote. "The pool was duly uncovered in the 1930s, with 4 colonnades around its edges and 1 across its middle." He continues, Ian Wilson reports, exhaustive excavations by Israeli archaeologist Professor Joachim Jeremias have brought to light precisely such a building, still including 2 huge deep-cut cisterns in the environs of Jerusalem's Crusader Church of St. Anne. All right, the fable they uncovered with a little more research. And now I have the privilege of showing you what a fable looks like in real life. This is the courtyard of the Church of St. Anne's. This is me taking the video, and I wanted you to see what a beautiful, peaceful environment it's like as you head over to what was the pools of Bethesda. And this is what you see. This is what they've uncovered so far, what they've dug up. See, what happens over the years is people fill this stuff in and they bury it. And so the present day Jerusalem actually sits at least in some places, 70 feet higher than the Jerusalem that Jesus was at. Some places it may be more or less. I don't know. I'm just thinking of one statistic I know near the wall, the Wailing Wall. So this is I showed you the courtyard. You just walk forward and you see this whole area. And this is where the pools were. Now I'm down in that area, just showing you some of the cool architecture from what they've dug out. And I'm thinking, you see how that doorway there is only like 3 feet tall. Well, you know the doorway wasn't 3 feet tall, so there's a lot more digging that yet has to be done. Who knows how much deeper it goes? But I wanted to give you a close-up view of what it looked like. Walking down to the pool of Bethesda, the cistern that's been uncovered, going, as you can see, well below sea level. Okay, I'm scared. It's dark. Hang on, I'm going to pause this and turn on my light. Yeah, it was scary because I was like, there's only like 2 of us down in this whole area. Nobody else was around, and we're going into this dark pit. Ghost story, anybody? Okay, so my buddy was filming me filming the thing. So this is the exact same moment. Now this is me telling you I had to turn on my light. I'm turning on the light on my phone. Dude, really? Yeah, I don't know why the camera turned. I don't remember that.
He must have changed the orientation of his phone.
Totally, he did. Okay, you can't see much, but there's water. I was too scared to go any deeper. Plus, it started getting wet down there. It was like the water was high, and I was like, okay, I'm close enough. That's good. We're good. So, first thing I wanted to point out to you, that they say it's a myth, they say it's a fable because no one has ever discovered, so therefore it doesn't exist. I was reading in one of the archaeology books, and you can bring up the lights, how all these scholars were talking about how the Exodus is a myth. And they say because there's no evidence that it ever happened. And then as the book is continuing, they said, do you know how many schools have researched for the Exodus, how many archaeologists have researched for the Exodus, and how much funding has been put into researching for the Exodus? And you know what the answer was? 0 at the point of the writing of that book. So they would pontificate that it didn't happen, it doesn't exist, there was no evidence, and nobody had looked for the evidence. This is the kind of thing we're dealing with as people of faith. All right, so the first thing, the pools existed. Second thing, it says an angel would go down, and when the water would move, because the angel going down, the first person into the water would get healed. Doesn't that sound kind of hokey to you? It doesn't sound like a biblical story to me. It sounds like a fairy tale. And so I'm wondering, what am I missing? Did this really happen? Was there a pool that an angel would visit and somebody would get healed? Or were these people just, superstitious? And is there a way of looking at this another way? Well, I came up with 2 options of looking at it. First one was John described what the people believed, not what actually happened. He's just telling you how they lived their lives. It's not a solid answer, though, because the text says this is what happened. The text doesn't say this is what people believe happened. I still think there's room for my description that John was just telling a story, but it's not a solid answer, so I can't, hang my hat on it. And the other possibility is it's what happened. There was an angel that visited this water and people got healed. But that's so odd. But scholar and pastor David Guzik said this isn't the only odd instance of supernatural healing in the Bible. And we don't dismiss the other one, so Steve, why dismiss this one? And he makes a list of them. For example, he says there was a putrid pot of stew that Elijah purified by sprinkling in a handful of flour. Okay. Or there was the healing of Naaman the leper, who had to go dunk in the Jordan River. There was the guy who was resurrected from the dead when his body touched the bones of Elisha. Okay. Probably nothing beats the one with Peter's shadow falling upon people and them getting healed. And then there were those who touched Paul's handkerchiefs and they got healed. Yeah, but these are all directly dealing with people and the miracles of prophets. And so I don't know. I can just give you what little I do know. Maybe this is what happened. Maybe there's some explanation I haven't discovered yet. I'm certainly not going to make the mistake of all these secular archaeologists who say it can't be this way because there's no evidence. Maybe we'll learn something in a few years. So, Bethesda existed. I almost said Bethsaida. I don't want to get those too mixed up. Bethesda existed. Not exactly sure what was going on with the angel. Now I want to talk about this guy. Jesus said, stop sinning or something worse might happen to you. There are a lot of people who think that every time you're sick, it's a consequence of sin. And if you just repent of your sin, you'll be healed. Well, I want to talk about sin as a consequence, illness as a consequence of sin, and then the other side of that. It can happen. Obviously, Jesus told this guy, the implication was it was your sin, and you better stop or it's going to happen again, even worse. Psalm 38:3 says, because of your wrath, there is no health in my body. My bones have no soundness because of my sin. I am sick because of my sin. Sin can cause sickness. Not all sin causes sickness, but it can cause sickness. 1 Corinthians, it says, it follows that if one of you eats the Lord's bread or drinks from his cup in a way that dishonors him, you're guilty of sin against the Lord's body and blood. So then, you should each examine yourself first and then eat the bread and drink from the cup. For if you do not recognize the meaning of the Lord's body when you eat the bread and drink from the cup, you bring judgment on yourself as you eat and drink. That is why many of you are sick and weak, and several have died. So in the Psalms, he says, my bones are sick because of my sin. In 1 Corinthians, some people were sick because of their sin. They even died because of their sin. And the specific sin was taking the Lord's Supper in a dishonorable way. And that's why every time we do the Lord's Supper here at Book of Life, I mention this. And I tell you to examine your hearts, and if your heart's not right with God, don't take communion. Better to repent of your communion, of your sin and take communion, or not take it at all. But don't come up with a sinful attitude. So, sin can cause illness, but not all sin can cause illness, and not all illness is a result of sin. John 9 makes this very clear. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Well, neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. This isn't a consequence of sin. There's another reason this man was born blind. All right, some sin causes illness, some doesn't. Some illness is caused by sin, some isn't. Don't know what else to tell you. If you're sick and there's sin in your life, repent. Ask the elders to pray over you, anoint you with oil. And as the scripture says, if you confess your sins, you'll be forgiven and you'll be healed. The effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man accomplishes much. That's in the context of healing, in the context of confessing sin. So if you're sick and there's sin in your life, repent of it, get prayed over. If the sin goes away, then you know it was a consequence of your sin. But maybe you're sick and you can't think of any sin in your life and you're asking God to show you and there isn't any and you're still sick, well then be confident that's a sickness not caused by sin. We like these nice little tidy packages, don't we? We want an answer for everything and we want to be able to just mark it down, say, oh, you're sick, pray, you'll get better. But you know it's not that tidy. We want it, but it's not so. Well, as the chapter goes on, we've got the healing of the guy. He's told to stop sinning. And now we have persecution against Jesus for healing the guy. Why would you persecute somebody for healing somebody? Because he did it on the Sabbath. Now, you're not Sabbath keepers. You don't understand the depth of passion that Sabbath keepers have for sanctifying that day and making sure they don't do anything that violates the sanctity of that day. Unfortunately, their religion became so important to them, the laws overruled love. And they were just a bunch of hypocrites. If you remember a couple weeks ago, we taught about hypocrisy, how hypocrites are legalists, and they're more concerned with the letter of the law than the spirit of the law. And they'd rather see somebody honoring the Sabbath than get better. They're more concerned with rules than love and mercy and justice. These guys were hypocrites. They should have rejoiced that the man was healed who'd been sick for 38 years. Instead of getting all holier than thou and saying, oh, you violated the Sabbath. You healed on the Sabbath. So they start the persecution with an attitude, but eventually they try to actually kill Jesus, and yet for another reason. John 5:18. The Judeans tried all the harder to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own father, making himself equal with God. All right, the first thing I want to point out is this word Judeans. Almost all modern translations of the Bible will say the Jews. And I have a problem with that because every time you see the bad guys in the New Testament, they're called the Jews. And that has lent towards anti-Semitism. Remember, Jesus and the apostles, they were the Jews too. They were all Jews. So you can't say the Jewish people are bad. They're called the Jews here. No, this was a certain sect or group. This was the leadership, the hypocritical leadership that wanted to kill Jesus. So calling them the Judeans, which is just as good a translation as the Jews, keeps us from being misled, taking down racist paths, and contributing to anti-Semitism. So I prefer Judeans. These are the religious, hypocritical leaders that wanted to kill Jesus. They're called the Judeans. It says they tried to kill him because he made himself equal with God. I suppose that's blasphemy, and you should be killed unless you are equal to God. So that's the question. Is Jesus equal with God? Was Jesus equal with God? Was he committing a sin, calling God his own father and making himself equal with God, or was he actually equal with God? Now, in a church like Book of Life, you might take the answer for granted. But there's a lot of people that don't know exactly who or what Jesus is, even to this day. And their religious schooling misinforms them. So, let's first look at his response, and then talk a little bit more about exactly who Jesus is, whether or not he really is equal with God. Equal, by the way, makes no room for yeah, but. You can't say Jesus is equal to God, but his Father is more equal. You can't do that. He's on par with God or he's not. All right, so here's what he said. The Father judges no one, but has entrusted all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father. He who does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. So here is Jesus saying, I am worthy of the same honor that you give God the Father. Yes, that's blasphemy if it's not true. Jesus is saying it is true. He is saying, I am worthy of the same honor you give God. There are people who say Jesus never claimed to be God. Oh, yes, he did. In several instances. Sometimes implied, implicit, like this, and other times he just out and out says it. He affirmed his divine status several times in the book of John. In John chapter 10, he had this conversation with some of the Jewish leaders and the crowd that was with them. He said, I and my Father are one. Then the Judeans took up stones again to stone him. And Jesus answered them, many good works I have shown you from my Father. For which of those works do you stone me? The Judeans answered him, saying, for a good work we do not stone you, but for blasphemy, because you being a man make yourself God. I and my Father are one. He was claiming to be God. It's not implicit. He is saying it. They understood exactly what he was saying, and they were going to stone him for it. A couple of chapters before that, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. Then the Judean said to him, you're not yet 50 years old, and you've seen Abraham? Jesus said to them, most assuredly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. They took up stones to throw at him. Jesus, they were always wanting to stone Jesus. Imagine if he had like a PR person who had said, you're not polling well in the divine category. You're really getting people upset. It would be best if you changed your message. Start emphasizing, the Son of Man part or maybe the Messiah part, but steer away from the divine part. That's just going to get you killed, alienate people. You want them to follow you, right? No. He just kept repeating himself because facts don't care about your feelings, to quote Ben Shapiro. Truth is truth, and you got to know who Jesus is. You can love him for who he is or hate him for who he is, but you got to know who he is. And he was telling everybody who he was. He said, most assuredly, before Abraham was, I am. Okay, so Jesus lived 2,000 years ago. Abraham lived 2,000 years before that. You're not even 50 years old, Jesus, and you claim to see Abraham, Before Abraham I was, I am. So why'd they try to stone him? Well, let me tell you where all this comes from. It was when he said, I am, that got them ticked off, more than claiming to have seen Abraham. This goes all the way back to Exodus chapter 3. One day while Moses, time frame, let me step away from the text. Jesus 2,000 years ago, Abraham 2,000 years before that. Moses was about 500 years before Jesus, give or take. Wait a minute. Let me get my time right. 1,400 years before Jesus-ish. Not 500. All right. So one day, while Moses was taking care of the sheep and goats of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, he led the flock across the desert and came to Sinai, the holy mountain. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him as a flame coming from the middle of a bush. Moses saw that the bush was on fire, but that it was not burning up. This is strange, he thought. Why isn't the bush burning up? I'll go closer and take a look. When the Lord saw that Moses was coming closer, he called to him from the middle of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he answered, yes, here I am. And God said, don't come any closer. Take off your sandals, because you're standing on holy ground. I am the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Moses covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. So God continues to talk to Moses, tells him he's supposed to deliver the people from Egypt. And Moses argues with him and says, basically, I'm not the right guy, pick somebody else. And God insists that he goes. And Moses says, but when I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors sent me to you, they're going to ask me, what's his name? So what can I tell them? The Egyptian gods, they all had names. These people aren't as close to God as they should be. They don't know God's name. So you're telling us about God, God of our ancestors. Which God are we talking about here, Moses? What's his name? So Moses is like, we know who you are, but do you have a proper name? God said, I am who I am. You must tell them the one who is called I am sent me to you. Now you get an idea of why they wanted to stone Jesus, because he was claiming to be I am, the one from the burning bush. He was claiming to be God. But that whole burning bush thing could be quite confusing if you pay close attention to it, because it started out saying, there the angel of the Lord appeared to him as a flame coming from the middle of the bush, and then God talks to him from the bush. This is a busy bush. Moses is there, the angel's in the bush, God's in the bush. Anybody else in there? And you begin to wonder what's going on. Who appeared to Moses in the bush? The angel of the Lord and God. Now, first of all, the angel of the Lord, bad translation. There is no Hebrew word for angel, actually. The Hebrew word is messenger. It's the same word. If I was king in Israel and I sent you to deliver a message to somebody, it'd be the exact same word. You'd be my messenger, my angel. So they shouldn't translate it angel. It should just be messenger. Because you have this in your mind that in the bush is some created spirit being that God made, subservient and lesser than God, in there with God. That's not the case. What we know at this point is the messenger of God's in the bush, but we don't know exactly who or what that is if this is the only part of the Bible we know. But if we know more about the Bible, then we know who the messenger of the Lord is. For example, in John chapter 1, John's the book where Jesus called himself the I Am. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Verse 14, and the Word, God's message, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Before Jesus was born as a human, he existed eternally with God the Father as the messenger of God. That's who was in the bush. It was Jesus. He appeared before Moses and called himself as the messenger of God and as God, because in the beginning was the Word was with God, but the Word was God. He was with God. He said, I am. And when he called himself I am, all those years later, to those who claimed to be disciples of Moses, they tried to kill him. When he told Moses I am, he worshiped. When he told these hypocrite Judeans I am, they tried to kill him. Shows you the difference. Same person, same word. Believers, non-believers. Righteous, hypocrites. So I find it interesting how in chapter 7 Jesus says, Moses gave you the law, didn't he? But not one of you obeys the law. Why are you trying to kill me? It all ties together. So, a lot of stuff going on tied to the pool. But our words in red, the thing that I want to focus in on this morning, I had on the title screen. He told the guy who he healed, stop sinning, or a worse thing will happen to you. And then I told you, sometimes sin results in illness and sometimes it doesn't. But all of sin is bad for you. In fact, it's sin that separates us from God. Sin is what has destroyed our souls. It is sin that will send us to hell. And in a sense, sin is what kills every one of us. You know, a friend's got cancer, and you say, oh, they got cancer, it's terminal. And a couple months later, they die from cancer. Yeah, but cancer is a consequence of sin. All of sickness is a consequence of sin. The Bible makes it very clear that in the Garden of Eden, paradise, we could have eaten from the tree and lived forever. But as soon as we disobeyed God, we fell. And our spirits and our bodies, they broke and they became mortal and sin-prone and sick-prone. And so sin always kills. It's interesting, we started off with an angel in a pool and ended up with an angel in a bush. One might have been a literal angel, if he was even real. My jury's still out on that. But one wasn't an angel at all. And by the way, the Greek word best means messenger too. That one angel, if it was a true story and reported exactly as it should have been, then he healed one person who won the lottery. The first one who could get in the water got healed. But Jesus, look what Jesus can do. I tell you the truth, whoever hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life and will not be condemned. He has crossed over from death to life. An angel might be able to heal a person, but the word of God heals everybody for all eternity. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for Jesus and that he is the angel of the Lord, the messenger of the Lord. The word of God provides healing of an eternal nature to all people who will have faith in him. Lord, I pray that you would help us to see our sin, the sins that are making us sick, perhaps even more so the sins that aren't making us sick, that we might tend to ignore them because they're not. And that you would help us to walk with you and to take sin seriously. Because after all, you died because of it and for it and to save us from it. And help us to never discount your sacrifice by willfully sinning. Lord, help us to be strong and forgive us our trespasses. For it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.